Hey everyone, welcome back to the Contractor Growth Network podcast. I'm Logan Shinholser, and today I have a special guest. It is Todd Dawalt of the Construction Leading Edge podcast, but he also does so much more than that. So, Todd, welcome to the show, man. How you doing?
Great. Logan, thanks for having me.
Good, man. So today we're talking about JETS, which stands for, this is your topic. You hit us with what it stands for.
It stands for just enough to start.
So,
and in my experience, it's the root cause of most of the chaos and profit bleeds that contractors are dealing with today.
how do you define just enough to start? Like, what does that look like? So if somebody's listening to this and as you describe it, they're going, oh, damn, that's me. What does that look like?
There's a pretty consistent set of symptoms, and if any of these sound familiar, like details are falling through the cracks. If you're a construction business owner and you're stuck in firefighting mode, spending 25, 50%, 75% of your time putting out fires, if your team is constantly in reactive mode, if you're not making as much money as you should, if you're dealing with profit bleeds like giveaways, rework, schedule delays, getting hit with opportunity cost, if your desire to throw your phone out the window and just drive to Mexico, if you find that is increasing, and you're frustrated at your customers, if the cortisol level of your team is really high because they're stressed, those are all some pretty common symptoms of the just enough to start trap.
And when we're talking about just enough to start, is this like just enough to start a business? So you're kind of just like flying by the seat of your pants. Is this just enough to start a new project, but then all the problems stem because you barely got this thing prepped? Like, I guess, when does this trap set in?
But actually, it shows up in all of those parts of the business. It shows up when starting a business. A lot of people do just enough to start. A lot of people do just enough to get a project started. It shows up in hiring a lot. They do just enough to get somebody on board and then try to figure it out later. But the focus of the conversation and where most of the chaos lives is doing just enough to get a project started, saying we're going to do just enough planning. Actually, it probably starts much earlier. Like, we can only do just enough to get an estimate out the door, and we'll figure out the rest later. Just enough to get a contract signed, and then we'll have to figure out the rest of these details later. Just enough to get a project started, get mobilized, get cash flow going, get the project started, and then we'll figure out the rest of the details later. So that's really where the majority of these symptoms come from. Let's get the project started, let's do just enough to get started, and then we'll figure out the rest later.
Well, I mean, we always have this idea that we've heard of, you fake it till you make it. Like, does this kind of align with that? Is this people that are just trying to fake it till they make it, then they're realizing like, oh man, I'm in the JETS trap?
I don't know if it's fake it till you make it, because that's sort of a conscious effort, to put on a front like we've got our stuff together. We're going to act like we have it together. But I think this is more, there's this missing phase of projects that a lot of smaller contractors don't even know exists, but it's very common in large commercial contractors. And it's the pre-construction phase. So I think for a lot of people, they just don't know what they don't know. Like, they don't know there should be a pre-construction phase. They don't know that there's another way to do it rather than just enough to start. So I don't think it's a conscious effort. I think in a lot of cases, people just look around and say, everybody else is doing free estimates and everybody else is just rushing to get projects started and everybody else seems to be focused on getting started. So maybe that's just the way it's supposed to be, but it causes a lot of problems.
So what you're saying is this is almost coming from a place of like just not knowing, or just you're ignorant to the fact that you should be doing these things versus you should be charging for estimates, but you're consciously just doing them for free, which is causing chaos.
Yes. Yeah, it's this unknown secret profit phase of every project, which is the pre-construction phase. A lot of people think it goes straight from sell the deal to construction. And that's how it typically goes, unfortunately, with a lot of residential contractors and some smaller commercial contractors. But with big commercial GCs, there is a pre-construction phase and they actually obsess over this pre-construction phase because they know the pre-construction phase is where profits are made or lost, schedules are made or lost, customer experience is made or lost. So that's why they obsess over it. But most, like when I had a residential business, I didn't know it existed. I didn't really think about it. Nobody ever told me, hey, you need to focus on your pre-construction phase. It was just like sell the deal, then let's get started. Then we'll figure out the rest as we go.
So what should the pre-construction phase look like? Like, what are you doing during that time?
Well, let me start with what people do or what people don't do that causes problems. There are a few key things like allowances. So starting a project with allowances is it's a recipe for disaster. So what a lot of people do is they plug an allowance in for flooring or cabinets or painting or something, and they say we don't need to figure this stuff out yet. Let's get the contract signed. Let's put an allowance in there, and then we'll figure that out later. Well, later comes in the middle of the project, and the selections are made, the allowance gets reconciled, and typically it comes in higher than what the client expected. And then the client's like, what do you mean you put the markup on top of the allowance? And all these uncomfortable conversations happen in the middle of the project, or maybe even at the end of the project, because the actual pricing wasn't figured out. Another thing people do is start projects without a complete design. The design's not complete, and they just say, well, let's just get started. We'll figure it out as we go, which causes lots of problems. Starting projects without fully buying out the project, sourcing all of the materials, writing all the subcontract agreements. People don't do that. So, what the just enough to start trap looks like is literally doing just enough to get to the next step. What do we got to do to get a contract signed? Let's do the bare minimum to get a contract signed. It's like there was a movie, Pearl Harbor, an old movie. And in the movie, there's a scene where they're launching these bombers, like B-24, B-17 bombers, off the decks of aircraft carriers. And these things are heavy. They're not designed to fly off aircraft carriers. So there's a scene where Alec Baldwin is Doolittle, the guy leading the raid, and he's like throwing all the stuff out, throw the machine guns out, throw the fuel cans out. We got to strip these things down. We have to have just enough to take off. And unfortunately, that's how a lot of people approach their projects. Like, let's do just enough to get a contract signed. Let's do just enough planning to get a framing crew started. Let's do just enough to get to the next phase, and then we'll figure out the rest later.
And kind of back to that, like ignorance versus, consciously doing this, is this in their mind, like, look, there's a level of like, if we do too much, time kills deals. We know that all this friction could potentially, if we add this stuff up, like maybe it is going to be past that budget. Like, I guess how much of this is, or I guess where's the line of like doing all the pre-con stuff that is going to make for a better project, but also balancing that with, we still got to make sales, because ultimately, if we just spend all of our time doing this and don't get the sale, we got no business. So I guess, how do you balance that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think part of it goes back to the free estimates, right? If you're doing free estimates, if you're a custom home builder, remodeler, deck builder, pool builder, if you're doing anything that requires some level of design and selections, even light commercial general contracting, maybe even landscaping, if you're doing free estimates on a project that requires design and selections, then you are forced into the just enough to start trap. So I guess in a way you're consciously choosing to do just enough to start, because if you're doing a free estimate, you can't figure all this stuff out, right? You can't spend the time and energy to do the design work for free and make all the selections. without getting paid for it. You just can't do it. So you choose consciously or unconsciously to do just enough to start. I think in the later phases of a project, like when it comes to pre-construction, most construction guys and gals are kind of cowboys. We're entrepreneurial. I was this way. I still have to fight against it, but it's like we're going to do this, and we're gonna get started, and we'll figure out the rest later, right? Because we're resourceful, we're entrepreneurial. We'll figure this stuff out later. And there's this belief that we don't have to figure it out now. I think that's one of the root cause problems is we don't need to figure this out now. So we choose to just get started and do just enough to start, and then kick that can down the road. And we later comes, it's coming at some point, and usually it just happens when there's a fire to put out. So I think some of it is conscious, some of it's unconscious. It probably depends on the situation and the person.
And is this something that your prescription for this would be like, look, you got to really buckle down and get this stuff dialed in? Or is this, you're a cowboy at heart, and instead of trying to, I don't know, wrestle in the cowboy, I don't do much cowboying, so I don't have a good analogy for how you rope them in. That's what I was looking for. Instead of trying to rope them in, is it better for them to hire somebody or assign this to somebody else on the team and go, look, I'm going to delegate my need to see this thing through on the front end? Like, who's supposed to do this in the actual company, especially when you're first starting?
Yeah, that's a good question. And what I've seen a lot of our clients who are construction business owners, they are the visionary, right? They're the cowboy. They have big picture ideas, visions for the future, plans to grow. They want to tackle big problems. They want to scale the business. They want systems and processes. They desperately want the systems and processes, but they are not the right people to build them because they don't have the attention to detail. They don't have the attention span. They're just not wired to create these things. So a lot of people are stuck in this situation of, well, I've got to have them. And yeah, I'm a visionary. So I'm just going to buckle down and I'm going to figure out how to do this. And it rarely works. They end up being miserable, and they don't actually get any systems and processes in place. So what is better is to think. There's a great book called Who Not How that I read last year. And most people think, well, how can I fix this problem? How can I solve this? How can I create systems and processes? And a better question, according to Dan Sullivan and Benjamin Hardy, who wrote this book, Who Not How, is think, who can help me do this? Because if you're that classic visionary, then you need to realize you're not wired to create these things. You're wired to be the visionary. So think, who can help me develop this stuff? Find somebody who is good at this, somebody who has a proven system to follow, and then just outsource, delegate it. So you get the benefit of having the systems and processes, but you don't have to go through the brain damage of trying to create them yourselves.
Especially when you're first starting off. I mean, I know for most people, we all start off by ourselves. And this is how I did it. It was just me. I'm definitely, as time has gone on and we're going through EOS right now as a company, I have learned that I am a visionary. I've always thought is like, oh, that's Steve Jobs is the visionary because they want to change the world. And I'm not rolling up every day in a black turtleneck. But when they define what a visionary is, that is me to a T, where I like to meddle in stuff and I like the big sales. But at the same time, when you first start off, you don't have the money to necessarily, I guess, hire somebody, or maybe you do. So I guess if you're first starting off, because that who not how is fantastic if you can then afford that person or find that person. What do you do in that situation if you're newer and you're trying to find your who, and maybe it's tough to hire a who?
Well, this is another example of just enough to start. A lot of people think when they start their business, well, I don't need to worry about that yet, right? I just need to make sales. I just need to get started. They think, I don't need to get my bookkeeping system in place yet. I hate bookkeeping. I hate accounting. Hell, I don't even know if I'm going to survive the first year. So why would I bother worrying about my bookkeeping? Same thing with putting systems and processes in place. But we've had hundreds of people come to us who have done just that, and they deal with the consequences of not putting systems and processes in place upfront. Most people do just enough to start, and then they deal with the consequences. It's sort of like it's equivalent of building a house and saying, you know what, we're gonna frame this house. I'm not sure we need a foundation yet, so we're gonna frame this house on dirt. And we're going to wait until the drywall starts cracking, and then we'll come back and we'll shore up the soft spots, right? That's the same as starting your business without putting these foundational systems and processes in place and then saying, I'll figure it out later. So if you want to be successful, if you want to have a business that survives and grows, you've got to have these foundational pieces in place. So the problem is people think they're optional. They think, well, I don't need to have a blueprint for my business. I don't need to have processes. And they believe they're optional. And this is probably why the failure rate is so high in construction businesses. It's also why so many people come to us years later because they didn't put the systems in place at the beginning. So how do you do it? You you have to get started. You have to, just like finding the money for proper financial systems and proper bookkeeping, you just got to budget for it. It's not optional. If you're going to build a business that lasts, these things are not optional. And that's why if you look at big companies, they did these things. They built their business on top of these foundational systems and processes. They didn't wait until the business grew to put the systems in place. And in fact, that's kind of that's a delusion that some people have. There's a pitfall that people fall into. They say, I'm going to do that. I'm going to put the right systems and processes in place when we get bigger. And that's sort of like saying, you know what, I'm gonna get in shape when I lose some weight, right? I'm gonna start going to the gym when I lose some weight. It's backwards. It doesn't work that way. So you have to break that mindset, that belief off that, yeah, I'm gonna do that when I get a little bigger. I'm gonna put these systems in place when I have more time. You may not have more time. Unfortunately, a lot of companies don't survive that.
So do you think this is a scenario where it's like losing weight? Like, I don't know how true this is, but this is kind of how I view it, where unless you're just naturally somebody that's going to go to the gym and want to work out and stuff like that, typically people are going to lose weight because either one, they've got a high school reunion coming up and their ex is going to be there and they don't want to look how they look now, or they have a heart attack and the doctor says, look, this is your last shot. You don't get this stuff changed. Like, this next heart attack may be the last one for you. It, is that kind of what happens here when people are in this Jets trap where it almost seems like a cycle. Like, I have like my youngest brother, he graduated college, but man, it took the whole family to get him to graduate college. And what he was so good at was, so we were all athletes in college, and you have to have a certain GPA to remain academically eligible. And TJ would just be under that line, and he would go to his professors and go, look, if I don't pass this class, I don't even need an A or a B. I just need a C, and I'll stay eligible. I'll keep my scholarship. And every time they said, okay, so he just got right above every single time until he graduated college. But I'd imagine, like, if he had to do that over and over and over, at some point, something has to give. So he was just so almost comfortable with that he knew, I don't need to study because I can just go talk to the teacher at the end of all this and I'll talk my way out of it.
Yeah.
So with all that said, is this Jets trap? Is this something that somebody kind of has to have that low point or that like epiphany of like, I can't do this anymore. I got screwed on my last job. I'm done. or can they just naturally pick themselves out of this proactively?
You bring up a really good point. So, what I've found is like the Jets trap is the root cause of profit bleeds and chaos. But over the years, as I've dug into this, like, and asked the question, all right, what's behind this? Why do people do this? And what I found is similar to your brother TJ. Most of the people who find themselves in the Jets trap, they and and I'll use myself as an example. When my back was against the wall, like if when I was running a company years ago, I got a call from Heather, the my accounts payable or accounting gal, and she said, "Todd, if we don't get some, I just been brought in to run this company a month or so before I was running operations, and she said, Todd, if we don't get a check in here soon, we're not going to be able to make payroll." So there were like 15 or 20 people, including myself, who were not going to get paid. And this was news to me. So I went into kind of panic mode to make stuff happen because there's this threat, and made stuff happen, got money in, solved the cash flow crisis. So a lot of people, like if you look back over if you're listening to this, look back over your career, when your back's against the wall, it's pretty incredible what you can make happen. All right. If you've got to get a check in, if you got to get a project across the finish line, you've got to get a customer satisfied, you'll do what it takes. But then what happens is once you do what it takes, that part of your brain that lit up when there was a threat, it just goes back to sleep until there's another threat. So I call it urgency addiction. A lot of people have urgency addiction. It's amazing what they can get done when things are urgent, but they only get stuff done when it's urgent. So they sort of, because of that, they get into this vicious cycle of let's do just enough to start. And there's no real threat right now. We'll deal with that when it happens. And then that fire slowly burns and then it erupts on a project or with a client or with an employee. They strap on their superhero cape. The urgency monster lights up. They save the day, and then they just go back to normal. So it is a vicious cycle where people are stuck in that, but it's also a choice, right? It's just that we've chosen to only act. If you have urgency addiction, you've chosen to act only when there's urgency. And it's a choice, it's a discipline that can be developed. Clearly other people do it. It's not something people are either born with or they're not born with. It's just a habit that people get into. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I learned this. There used to be a guy on our team that we were just chatting one day and we were just talking about, like, I think for fun, like spirit animals, and his spirit animal was the Tasmanian devil, which was very fitting. But he was somebody that I learned because we went through, behavioral assessments as a team and all that stuff, that he thrived on chaos, like just absolutely loved it, because for him, he wouldn't have to necessarily prep for stuff because he could always just figure it out on the fly when his back was against the wall. He was the ultimate, like, I'll make it happen type deal. But what I also learned was, as time went on, the chaos of everybody, around you, where you're having to kind of deal with this, it starts to take its toll. And I realized that it wasn't necessarily that he like loved it. It was just like what he was comfortable with. So if there was an environment that was more systematic, the same way that somebody who is very systems driven sees somebody else who's chaotic, they go, oh my God, like that produces anxiety. Like, I don't like that. It's the same feeling from his perspective of there's a system in place, like subconsciously, like he kind of sabotages it because then it brings chaos and it puts him back into a sweet spot, AKA his back is now against the wall and he's almost back in like hero mode. So that urgency addiction, like that's a great way to phrase this, because I see this a lot with people of, they're just so good at just like what you're saying, just getting up to enough where they can then come in, save the day. You get that high of, I made it. I struck out 9 times in a row, but then I hit the grand slam. And then you're stuck back in that same cycle of 9 more strikeouts until the next grand slam. And it's like golf. You play just enough on that one hole to keep you going for the next 4 holes without snapping your club in half. So it's this cycle. So I guess in yours, I mean, from what you see, I mean, you've had multiple businesses and now you work with people. Like, how do you get out of this? Like, how are you creating your own discipline to finally say enough is enough?
Well, what you're talking about reminds me of a news story I saw in my local area. There was a church that caught on fire, and it was arson. And what was interesting was they found out that a couple of local firemen actually started the fire. So this is what happens with a lot of business owners. The fireman becomes the arsonist. They love the fire, they love the thrill, so they either let things burn consciously or unconsciously until they become a fire, or they consciously cause problems just because they like that chaos. So the first step is to realize this is a problem. All right, this is a choice. Step back and realize, okay, think about who is this affecting, this chaos. The thing about a lot of construction business owners is their baseline for stress, their normal baseline for stress is so high that they don't even know what normal is anymore. Like, they think it's normal to wake up at 2 o'clock every morning worrying about things. They think it's normal to work 70 hours a week. They think it's normal to go home, work 10, 12 hours a day, go home, work their dinner down, and then go into their office or answer phone calls all week and think it's normal not to be able to take a vacation. So first of all, you got to step out and think, all right, this is not sustainable. Maybe I can handle it, but who's feeling the collateral damage here? Is your team feeling the stress? Is your spouse? Are your kids growing up before your eyes and you're not spending time with them? Are you not able to take vacation? I spoke with one of our clients a few months ago, and he has a teenage son, and he was like, Mike was talking to his son, and Mike had a big business. It was a family business, second or third generation, and the son said, like, I'm out. I have no interest. I have no interest in being in this business. Why would I want to be in this business? Dad, you're never happy. So the first step is to get outside yourself and look at, or maybe you can handle the stress, but what about everybody else? And then decide, all right, something has to change. Something has to change. There has to be a better way. And that's really the first step, is making the decision that something has to change.
Okay, so in this kid's situation, this was almost like an external thing. This was like instead of having a big, heart attack, you had a small scare, if you will. But this was enough because I know I've talked to a couple of dads that are contractors that their son has taken over, and I talked to the son, and I'm like, "Do you want this business?" And they're like, "Yeah, yeah," and you can just hear it in their voice of they just don't want it. And I don't know if it's just not a cool, it's drywall. Like, there's probably not too many kids that in 4th grade, what do you want to be when you grow up? They're like, sheetrock is my life. Like, they don't draw that out. So I can never tell if it's that or if it's like the chaos associated with it. So in this case, it sounds like with Mike, it was an external thing of the son saying, look, essentially, I don't want your life, which, my son is 13 months, so he is yet to offend me in anything, but I can imagine that hits pretty heavy. So with Mike, what does Mike then do from there? So now he knows this is how his family feels.
I think there's one more thing for Mike to look at. Maybe there's some people listening like, I'm a lone ranger. I don't have any family. It's just me. But you really have to look at the financial impact of the just enough to start trap, right? If you're doing just enough to start, you're probably leaving a lot of money on the table, which means you're working for less than you should. And in some cases, it's a startling amount of money is being left on the table every year, which is affecting your profitability, but it's also affecting your long-term wealth, right? So instead of money being invested in a 401k or invested in real estate, it's just bleeding out in the form of rework and schedule delays and things like that. So it's not unusual for me to talk to people who are bleeding out six figures of profit, not six figures of revenue, but six figures of profit, net profit every year. So you got to think, all right, I'm working really hard and this money's just bleeding out. Something has to change. So what do you do? So there are a few steps, and we've taken a few hundred people through this process. And the first step is really to create your strategic blueprint for your business. And this is to design your business the way you want it to run. Get really clear on what do you want this business to look like? And maybe a shorter question that you need to answer is, what do you want? Right? What do you want your lifestyle to look like? What do you want your business to look like in the future? And most people are really good at answering the question what they don't want. Like, and when I ask them, hey, what do you want? Well, I don't want to do this and I don't want to do this. Like, okay, that's great. But what do you want? And get really clear on what you want this business to produce for you and your family. And then work backwards from there and then design your business. We call this designing your strategic blueprint for your business. To get really clear on what do you want this business to look like and how do you want it to run? If somebody hired Todd and Logan and said, I want you guys to build me a machine, we would say, great. What is the machine going to produce and how much of it will it produce? Right? What are the outputs? And it's the same thing for your business. Unfortunately, most people don't ever do this. They just jump in and start taking projects. So step one is to create your strategic blueprint for the future. And then step two is what we found is if you want to eliminate chaos is to get your pre-construction process dialed in. If you want to get out of firefighting mode, stop details from slipping through the cracks, eliminate profit bleeds, and if you want to get out of the just enough to start to trap, it's to have a well-developed, well-designed pre-construction process that gives your field teams and your subcontractors everything they need to finish instead of just enough to start. So we think of this like a handoff. If you've ever watched an Olympic relay, there's a handoff of the baton. And that's how it should be from sales to operations, or from estimating to construction, or from pre-construction to construction, a complete handoff of all the information that they need, all the communication, and all the accountability. So those are the first few steps to solving these problems. Strategic blueprint, well, making the decision something has to change, design your strategic blueprint, and then get your pre-construction process dialed in.
On this strategic blueprint, how this idea of like we needed to visualize and set, get clarity around what the business needs to be. This is, I think a lot of, programs talk about this, but like, what are some best practices that you've seen as far as like, because I talked to the person that they're like, I want to grow this thing so fast. I want to franchise it. I want to work 1 hour a week. And they go through this whole stuff. And I'm like, well, how long you been doing this for? And they're like, oh, I'm about to start it. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, let's get through the first month of business first. Then we can start to talk about how do we, franchise this all over the world and, never, so do you have like a timeline? Do you have a certain set of criteria of, hey, you need to get this down to the exact org chart over that period? Like, what does that strategic blueprint look like from what works best in your perspective?
It it's they're all different. It has to be customized to what the entrepreneur wants, right? I can give you a couple of best practices for every strategic blueprint we've done. For example, a good place to start would be there are 25 key activities, about 25 key activities in every construction company that one person needs to be responsible for. So part of that strategic blueprint is to map each of those 25 responsibilities to one person, right? And this is crucial, is to have, if it's a key part of the business, one person needs to be responsible for it. We can't have two people who are accountable for the same result. This goes back to, I call it the starving horse syndrome. It's an old saying I heard 15 years ago. The best way to starve a horse is to have two people feed it. So one of the best practices is, if something's really important in the business, make sure one person is accountable for it. So that means change orders. One person needs to be accountable for change orders on a project. Customer communication, daily logs, schedule, budget. One person needs to be accountable for each of these things. Another best practice that we found, especially with, I would say, most companies we work with, and this works for all home builders, remodelers, and general contractors, and it works for most trade contractors, is to have four major functions going. You mentioned EOS, the traction book, they have major functions of the business. What we found that works best is to have four major functions of the business: sales, and then to separate pre-construction from sales and operations. So you have sales, pre-construction, construction, and then finance slash admin. That's a good framework that we've found for the four major functions. So the big takeaway there is create a, a, a major function in your business called pre-construction, and then have one person accountable for pre-construction on each project. Separate that from sales and separate that from construction, because the skill set needed to be good at pre-construction is very different from the skill set needed to be good at sales and the skill set needed to be good at construction. So those are a couple of best practices that we found apply to the vast majority of people that we've helped put their strategic blueprint together.
So, I mean, the fact that you are putting pre-construction pretty much, I mean, if you have four major functions: sales, pre-construction, construction, and then back office. I mean, the fact that you are putting pre-construction as its own department almost, I mean, that's how important you find this to be. Who type of person is a good fit to head up this pre-construction? Because I'd imagine sales, you need a good salesperson. Construction, you need somebody who's maybe good at being a PM. But like, who's going to bridge that gap between the salesperson and the PM?
Yeah, it's not the salesperson, because salespeople are not always, but for the most part, salespeople are not known for their attention to detail, right? Um, Construction people, the best superintendents, the best project managers, they're just good at driving things, making things happen, right? They take a plan, they drive it to completion. You give them something to build, and they're going to build it. When you ask a superintendent to put on a different hat and go make selections or work with an interior designer or go to Ferguson and help pick out plumbing fixtures, that's not their strong suit. So it really goes back to that strategic blueprint. If you're going to have pre-construction as a separate department or a major function, I would start with the results. What are the results that you want this person to deliver? And they're usually things like, well, we need to have a good customer experience. We need this person to be super detail oriented. They need to be really good with people. They need to be good at communication. And they also need to be able to push things along and manage a pre-construction schedule so things move forward. So they are pre-construction directors. They are selections coordinators. They need to be able to deal with designers in many cases. So it really starts with, what are the results you need this person to deliver, and then work backwards into, all right, what sort of characteristics are we looking for? But those are typically the things: good with customers, really good at communication, super detail oriented.
So when you say like you're defining this, are you looking at them and going, look, they need to, at the end result of this pre-construction, they need to have like a production packet that is fully filled out with this information. they also need to have the client that's still excited. Like, are you just starting with like the end in mind of like when you're passing that baton, this is what the baton's going to look like, and then we like reverse engineer from there?
Exactly. Yeah.
And then how do you, okay, so we start there. And then now, is it up to pre-construction to say, hey, sales, this, I need you to run the ball to the 40-yard line. I'm going to pick it up from the 40 and move it to the 20. Or is it on pre-construction from what you've seen, where pre-construction says, sales, you tell me how far you're going to run it, and I'll kind of figure it out. So if you want to run to the 40, I'll meet you at the 40. If you want to run to only the 15, I'll meet you at the 15 and take it all the way. How do you then figure out where the handoff zones happen from sales to pre-construction to production?
Yeah. The key is to know where that handoff is going to happen, right? You've probably watched some football plays where the quarterback thought he was handing it off at one point, and the running back didn't realize it was a running play. So the key is that there is a consistent handoff point. And what we've found that works best is you get everybody in the room and agree on what they're going to do. So here's what doesn't work, Logan. This is what I tried for 15 years is I would see a problem, I would go into my office, I would close the door, hammer out an SOP, a process, just be so proud of it. Like, this is perfect. This is going to work. And then I would go out and attempt to cram it down the throats of my team. And then I would be disappointed at why it didn't work. It seems like they resisted it. They didn't appreciate the perfection. And it was because I was working against human psychology. All right. So what works best, we've done this with hundreds of our clients. So this is the secret sauce to getting people to buy into a process, is get the team together and say, all right, this is the end result, right? This is the goal line. This is the handoff. We need to agree on what a complete handoff is from pre-construction to construction, right? Let's agree. You as the visionary, you as the business owner, you don't have to figure that stuff out and try to cram it down your team's throat. You need to get your job is to facilitate a conversation where the team says, yes, this is how we should do it. We will commit to doing this. And then do the same thing with the handoff from sales to pre-construction. And then everybody agrees, okay, this is how we're going to do it, right? And everybody commits. They're making commitments that this is how we're going to do it. And then once you have that process agreed upon by the whole team, then you document it. And then you bake it into your software. And then you hold people accountable to it.
Yeah, I've done what you're talking at the beginning, where you like come back and you worked it all out over the weekend and you explain it to the team and you're like, hey guys, this is when you applaud. Like, you're supposed to like
That's right.
praise me for all the hard work that I did over the weekend. And now all of our problems are solved. And it's just, there's no buy-in whatsoever. It's just, ultimately, this was what Logan did over the weekend. Like, Logan, you probably should have spent time with your family instead of working on that document. So, um, and with what you are doing, are you bringing, like, is this like do you run a workshop that's all like where you bring your salesperson in, your pre-construction potential person in, your actual PM? Like, I guess, how do you work, Todd? Because like, if this is such a big sticking point to you, I'd imagine you at least have some resources somewhere that's like, this is basically how you set up your pre-construction department or seat, if you will.
Yeah. As part of we have a program called Systematize Your Construction Business. And a big part of that, really the pivotal part of that, is we call it the team nail the handoff session. And we have an execution plan that we give to our clients, training videos, we set them up. Here's how to facilitate your nail the handoff session. And in some cases, we've run these team sessions in person. Somebody from my team goes and actually facilitates these with some of our larger clients. And we have a process and a system to follow for that. And consistently what we hear is people who are like you and I probably are like, man, I've tried this before. I've tried processes and systems before, and they haven't followed them. And I'm concerned people are going to think this is corny or goofy. And then they go through this process. And what we hear very consistently, one example a guy named Sean Dominguez he runs a $25 million commercial GC firm in Florida. He said one of his longtime superintendents pulled him aside after this team session and said, yeah, we've been waiting on this. We've needed this for a long time. So what we hear consistently is the team is bought in, the team is energetic, the team's excited, they're taking ownership of these things, and they're driving implementation because they were part of the process. And all of us are much more likely to implement a plan that's ours, or at least we're part of, than the plan that Logan or Todd brings to us on a Monday morning and tries to cram down our throat.
So do you need to have because like you mentioned, like there's 25 functions and each function needs to have one person tied to it. And I'd imagine it's you and three other people on your team. I mean, that's six and a quarter functions per person. Um, do you need to have a certain team size for this to make sense? Or is this even as like a solopreneur, you can still build out the pre-construction seat. You just got to know what that looks like.
Yeah, there are two approaches to this. One would be to say, all right, we're going to wait until we hire somebody and then we'll define their role and then we'll define our process, right? And actually a lot of people try this. They think, well, I think I need a project manager, so I'm going to hire a project manager and he or she is going to bring the process and system and they're going to define their role for me, or I think I need somebody in sales, so I'm going to hire a really good salesperson and let them figure this stuff out for me. I've tried that. That rarely works. What works better is to have a blueprint for that role. So if you're going to hire somebody who's going to be a project manager, it's really important that you get clear on the results that you want this project manager to produce, because that will inform the job description. And then it's really important that you have a process that this project manager can plug into so that you can hold them accountable, at least as a starting point. So if you're a one-person business, now's the time. Design your business the way you want it to run. And then you'll have a blueprint for actually hiring people, and you'll know the sequence of what needs to be hired. You'll have clarity on what their roles and responsibilities will be. If you have a small team, now's the time to do it. Like there's no bad time to do it. Actually, the only time it doesn't work is when it's too late. We have had a few people come to us and the ship's just going down. They've taken a hit below the waterline. The profit bleeds are too bad. People are leaving. There's an exodus from the company and they have no work. Their cash flow situation's bad and it's just too late. And that would be sort of like rearranging chairs on the Titanic. But for everybody else, whether you have your 1-person team, 3-person team, 10-person team, if you're dealing with that chaos, now's the time.
And do you typically find like the person who's going to own this seat? Um, is it usually there's probably a great person within your company that they would be great at it. It's like the whole EOS is, do they get it? Do they want it? And do they have the capacity to have it?
Yep.
Is this typically somebody internal that steps up, or is this like most of the time you have to then eventually hire somebody outside to come in? Like, what does that typically look like?
The first step, my advice is always look inside and reshuffle. And what we've seen in many cases is there's a small team. Like, for example, I just interviewed one of our clients, Ross and Lachlan Franklin. They're from Canada and they're 2 sons and their dad. So it's Ross and Lachlan and their dad, Mallory. And they've been running a general contracting firm and they were all working out in the field and they were all doing estimating and they were all doing sales. They're all doing this sort of this 3 musketeers, all for one for all type approach. And they went through this process and they realized, we can just divide and conquer. So Lachlan will take pre-construction. Dad will take sales. Ross will run operations. And what we've seen in many cases is it's just a matter of reallocating resources. and it's eliminating a lot of toe stepping. There are people duplicating efforts. So the first step, and if you have a small team, there's a pretty good chance you don't need to hire somebody. You just need to shuffle the deck and reallocate those resources. In some cases, it does make sense to bring somebody in from the outside. And by having a really clear blueprint and really clear results that you want them to deliver and a process to follow, that dramatically increases the likelihood of getting the right candidate in there and them being successful.
And then on this, like when you're building out the system associated with it, is it common for people to have like checklists of like, hey, when you hand it from the salesperson to the pre construction person, you need to check off that we have, I don't know, down payment taken care of. They already have these things picked out. Like, is this? I guess like when you're establishing that handoff zone, is it pretty boilerplate across different companies, or is this like each company is going to have their own version of that checklist?
80% will probably be pretty similar, but it's customized because every municipality has special permitting requirements, even within their special zoning requirements and HOA requirements, depending on the exact location. Um, so every every nail the handoff process, every nail the handoff checklist is different and it's customized. It needs to be customized. We don't do boilerplate stuff. I've seen a lot of people out there who are like, here, just download this checklist and just use it. And it doesn't work very well. Um, Here's how we think about a handoff. It's not an email. It's not like, hey, go check out the OneDrive folder. We think of handoffs like a loan closing, right? So if you've bought a car, if you've bought a piece of real estate, there's a closing, there's a title company, and they have a list of stipulations. And if you clear 26 out of 27 stipulations, you ain't closing. So that's the way we think about a handoff is pre-construction comes to the table, operations comes to the table. There's a handoff checklist that's agreed upon. And if pre-construction has 25 of 27 things, then the construction team is expected to say, let me know when you're done. This is not ready to hand off. And everybody's okay with this. And pre-construction is holding construction accountable. Construction is holding pre-construction accountable. It's all about building these structures for the team holding each other accountable.
Because I'd imagine, especially if the owner is still selling and the owner is, susceptible to Jets trap, their handoff zone to pre-production could very much start really well and then little by little get back to, well, this is just enough to get started with the pre-construction, and they're slowly working their way back into that same trap that got them into this situation in the first place.
Yes. So owners have to be accountable to the processes as well. And that's why everybody in the room, see, one of the big problems that I see when I get into organizations, our clients, construction business owners will say, my people won't make decisions. My people come to me. Every problem lands in my lap. They're constantly asking me questions. Why can't they figure these things out on their own? And when I dig into it, it's because there are documented processes, but they're not being followed. And they're not being followed by the owner. I'll tell my client, like, look, you're not following your process. And your team is not confident in what to do because you're handing the ball off really well sometimes. Sometimes you're telling them to do things that you agree to be accountable for. Sometimes you're going a little too far and they're not sure what you're doing. You're out here freestyling and they're not confident. And so a lot of these frustrations, like they're asking me so many questions and why won't they take ownership? These are symptoms of low confidence from the team. And it's because the process isn't being followed. So owners need to be accountable. Everybody in the room needs to say, okay, if this is what we're going to do, right? This is how we do it. And everybody's okay to hold each other accountable. So it's not when there's an issue, it's not, hey, I think you should do this. It's, look, here's the process. Alex, you said you would do this, right? I need this. So there's no finger pointing. It's like I was building a hospital edition 15 or 20 years ago, and it was an emergency department edition. And I knew I needed to get a state building inspector to come through and approve it. And I knew I was close. I knew I wasn't quite there yet, but I got the guy scheduled and I was hoping to get his approval. And so we met at the job site trailer, walked to the ambulance entrance. We walked in. There's quite a bit of work still going on. Final details. We walked around the racetrack, came back to the ambulance doors. He didn't say a word to me until we got back, and he said, "You call me when you're done." And he got back in his car and left. So everybody needs to be okay saying, "Hey, you call me when you're done. This is not done." And pushing it back to the person who hasn't completed the handoff.
All right. I think that's a good way to end it. I like that. Which I'd imagine it takes a lot of confidence to get to that point to say that to somebody. So, if somebody's listening to this, Todd, and they want to connect and they want to learn more about, hey, they're part of this cycle, this trap right now, or they just go, look, I don't think I'm quite there, but man, this pre-construction stuff sounds awesome. Like that's definitely a huge piece of like that would make my life so much better. How do they connect with you? Like, what's the best way?
Yeah, there are a couple of resources that I would recommend starting with. If you've heard us talk about free estimates and you're like, wait a minute, there's another way? The answer is yes. So we have a free Get Paid for Estimates masterclass. We used to sell this for $1,000 or so, but we declared war on free estimates a couple of years ago. And you can get our entire Get Paid for Estimates masterclass. I think last time I looked, we've helped 1,200 or so people get paid for estimates, and it is entirely possible to do it. So we can share the link in the show notes. Another resource is there's a specific part of the pre-construction process that gets missed a lot. It's called the buyout phase. And I don't have time to go into it. I did a podcast episode on this, and I actually put together a buyout playbook. So if you want to buy out, if you want to learn how the big companies buy out their projects before it starts, before they break ground, how they lock in profits and reduce risk, we've got a buyout playbook that I'll make available too. You can have that link in the show notes. And then if you want to connect with us, go to constructionleadingedge.com. Check out our podcast. We have 380 episodes or so. A lot of resources there. And then there's a link there. If you want our help, if you want to talk to us about how we might be able to help you, there's a link there where you can apply for a call.
Cool. Well, Todd, I appreciate it, man. I like the, I really like I understand the Jets trap. I really like the idea of pulling out the pre-construction into its own, like it is that important that one person needs to own it. So that personally to me is like my biggest takeaway. I thought that was fantastic. So I appreciate you coming on here, sharing this. This was super helpful. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks, Logan.
Cool. Thank you, guys.